Hello, my name is Daniel Schoonmaker. I'm the Executive Director of Michigan Sale Business Forum, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's presentation in the Michigan Sale Business Forum webinar series. For those that are not familiar with our organization, the forum is a collaboration of businesses and institutions dedicated to promoting practices that advance climate leadership, social justice, and the creation of a circular economy. We host events and programs throughout the state, including this monthly Michigan Sale Business Forum webinar series, which is presented by ShoePad with additional support from Foresight Management. We do have two in-person events coming up this month. First, next week in Grand Rapids, the West Michigan Business Forum and the Institute of Packaging Professionals West Michigan chapter are collaborating at a luncheon forum on Monday, December 12th at Kendall College for Art and Design in downtown Grand Rapids, discussing current trends and issues in packaging design and specification for local businesses and industry. Then Michigan Sale Business Forum and Delta College will present a forum on green buildings, sustainable design, LEED certification, and on-campus sustainability on Wednesday, December 14th at Delta College in Midland. This event is free with registration. And you will find the registration details for both in the chat in a moment. Our next webinar, Fun as a Renewable Energy Resource for Your Organization, will be on Wednesday, January 11th, featuring a conversation with Robin Shop of Gardu Consulting on ways to cultivate an authentically and productively fun work environment that continually fuels your organization's success. A great way to kick off the new year. Finally, please do consider becoming a member of the forum if you're not already. If you're already a corporate or institutional member of one of our regional programs, a professional MISPF membership is complimentary. If not, you become a professional member today for only $50. Now I'd like to introduce our program, what the election results mean for sustainability in Michigan. For attendees, please note that you can share thoughts and questions with the panelists or all attendees through the chat function. We have time at the end of the presentation for open questions and answers. Nicholas Occupenti has been the Government Affairs Director at the Michigan League of Conservation Voters since January of 2018. He brings years of experience in policy, politics, and advocacy. Before spending the 2015-2017 school year in Spain learning Spanish and teaching, he served for 6 years as the Policy Community Active Director for the West Michigan Environment Action Council. Kate DeVries is a partner with the Whitmer Group, a multi-client lobbying firm in Lansing, where she focuses on economic development and electric vehicle policy. Prior to joining Whitmer, she managed a variety of legislative and regulatory issues as staff for State Representative David LeGrand and worked in child health advocacy. And Karen O'Brien has worked with the Michigan Recycling Coalition since 1993. In addition to managing the organization, her interest lies in building consensus and movement around pro-recycling policies that work for both the public and private sector. As a nonprofit development specialist and facilitator, Karen has led many nonprofit organizations through strategic planning and development efforts. So I'd like to first give everyone an opportunity for some brief introductory remarks. Nick, could you tell us a little about your work and what you're excited about today?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here. This is a great presentation. Perfect timing with the lame duck session wrapping up late last night into the early hours of this morning. I'm so really excited to be a part of this discussion today. I'm the Government Affairs Director for the Michigan League of Conservation Voters, and that work is really being a staunch advocate on behalf of Michigan's air, land, water, and democracy. Michigan LCV is an organization that is dedicated to playing in the arena. That means we both directly interject into politics and elections, as well as very much care about legislation and policy making. And then on the C3 side of things, community education and advocacy. We have a statewide organization, 4 offices, Grand Rapids, Ann Arbor, Traverse City. We got some staff in the Kalamazoo area, as well as in Detroit and Oakland County. 40+ strong organization, growing. I'm really excited and appreciate being with you today. Looking forward to the discussion, Dan.
Thank you so much, Nick. Kate, would you mind telling us a little about yourself and the Whitmer Group?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Dan. I really appreciate it. My name's Kate DeVries. Like Dan said, I'm a partner with the Whitmer Group. We are a multi-client lobbying firm in Lansing. So that means that we work for the clients who hire us. We are very fortunate that we also get to do so while living our values. And some of the work that we do focuses very heavily on electric vehicle policy and consumer adoption. So it's an exciting area that we're heading into the new cycle, looking forward to improving the climate here in Michigan. I'm really grateful to be invited here today. As a multi-client lobbyist, we tend to be an inch deep and a mile wide on the work that we do, and help connect our clients to decision makers. So I really appreciate getting to be here today and participate in the discussion. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you so much. And Karen, can you tell us a little about yourself and your work at the MRC?
Sure. So I've been with the MRC, Michigan Recycling Coalition, for many years, but come to you today a little bit tired and weary because we just passed Part 115 changes through the legislature last night, and they're on their way to the governor for signing. And so I'm a little bit short on sleep. But the Michigan Recycling Coalition has been around since 1982. We advocate for recycling, composting, waste reduction policy, and really implementation practices, promoting best practices with our professional members across the state, and we'll continue to do that with gusto now that we have policy and funding to support our efforts. So glad to be talking with you here today.
And we're glad to have all of you with us today. So to get us started, and Karen kind of queued that up, we are in the midst of an abbreviated lame duck session. So what's happening? We know that at least one piece of legislation that is material to sustainability in the state, so the Part 115 legislation package you just referenced, did see some movements. What updates do we have on this and other bills that may be going forward that we should care about?
Yeah, so House Bills 4454 through 4461 are the result of the work of like 70 different stakeholder groups working over a several year period to really evaluate current solid waste policies to see where we could minimize the policy preference that has been in statute for years, minimize the preference for disposal. Our policy preference of disposal has resulted in an overcapacity of landfills in Michigan and has kept the cost of waste disposal artificially low. And it makes it difficult for recycling and composting to compete. So that's the crux of what we were trying to do with this package. The package is really kind of centered around county solid waste planning, which we're now calling county materials management planning. So we have the funding to support and call for all counties in Michigan to begin to develop their plans for how they're going to manage the waste materials that are generated in the county. So they first have to get a handle on how much waste is being generated. And then through the planning process, they've got to figure out what kind of facilities they might need to be able to recycle more, compost more, better manage their waste, what kinds of programs, what kinds of services are needed. So county planning really makes an effort to put these choices about how we manage our waste in the hands of local communities. And so we hope and we plan to educate local communities to really choose their own destiny about how these materials can be diverted and recovered for productive use by manufacturing operations in their own communities or in the Great Lakes region as a whole. So I think it's great progress, and I'm excited to get started on actually implementing this kind of package than just talking about it.
Nick and Kate, any thoughts on what happened in Part 115 or anything else that that may have popped up this past week or is still popping up?
I'll let Nick go ahead. I have something else I can mention, but if Nick, you have anything on part 115, I'd be happy to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a bill package that I've been involved with going back to the West Michigan Environmental Action Council. It was a process that took many years to develop and definitely a step forward for the state of Michigan. There were some last minute amendments that are worth talking about that were added from some folks in the chemical industry that environmental groups ended up opposing those particular amendments. In terms of advanced recycling or chemical recycling, the notion of using gasification pyrolysis type of techniques to recycle plastics or repurpose those materials. So that's something that I think will continue to be an issue. Environmental justice communities look at federal level potentially proposed rule rollbacks to the Clean Air Act and are worried that air emissions and air pollution associated with some of those technologies might impact communities that have disproportionately been burdened by air pollution. So that's a piece that we opposed even while supporting the rest of the package and seeing it move forward. I think we'll probably revisit in years to come. And it's an important conversation to have because those technologies probably do offer potential as they move. From the conservation perspective, we want to move away from the days of using gasification pyrolysis type techniques to produce pellets and or fuel to burn, because that's something from a climate emissions perspective, from an air pollution perspective, we certainly want to get away from. But it's a conversation to have, given the wildness that can be the lame duck session. This package was all but dead until about 10 days ago. And then, you have some movement behind the scenes and, all of a sudden without a hearing on the Senate side, we've got a moving package, but that's how the legislature works and something that produced a net positive result in the passage of this recycling legislation. So more work to do always with big scale legislation, but at the end of the day, happy to see progress here.
Kate, it sounds like there's something else that you've been monitoring.
Yeah, I think some people on this call might be interested in a wastewater project that just received finalized funding last night over in Muskegon and Ottawa counties. So that's a wastewater line that would actually connect the Coopersville area over to the Muskegon County Resource Recovery area to that treatment plant. Right now, there are quite a few agribusinesses in the eastern Muskegon and Ottawa County areas that are trucking wastewater all the way up to Muskegon because the capacity at the current Coopersville plant where they're treating their water is limited and they can't handle any more flow. So it's a very exciting project that's going to open up that region and prevent trucks from going over the road, burning fossil fuel, damaging roads with wastewater. And also at the Muskegon Wastewater Recovery Center, they use the water that they treat to irrigate agriculture. So it's going to be a great project once it's all completed in about 2 years. And we're grateful to the state for finalizing that last night. That said, I think lame duck is pretty much done. I don't expect that there will be anything else popping up. Everybody has gone home and sort of brushed their hands off and said, that's that. Happy holidays and see you next year in the new legislature.
Wonderful. And congratulations on that, Kate. And I will say I hadn't even been aware that was something that was going on. So
it flew a little under the radar, but it's an exciting project that's been in the works for about 15 years that finally is going to be done.
Well, that's fantastic.
That wastewater capacity and cleanliness too for folks over in Muskegon and Ottawa counties.
And Dan, I can add a few more items that we were watching, but just ended up never receiving attention that folks can put on the radar for next year. So the ongoing discussion between local units of government, environmentalists, and industry around aggregates. It's a large package of bills that ended up not seeing action. I'm sure we'll be back early next legislative session. And of course, aggregate mines are all across the state of Michigan and impact every community. PILT, which is an acronym for Payment in Lieu of Taxes for the kind of more uniform taxation policy around utility scale solar, supported by, interestingly, both environmental groups and utilities, that did not receive any action. There was a new underground storage tank bill that made its way post-election back into the mix, and it decreased the setbacks from drinking water wells with the sign off of an engineer. That has had changes that were supported by Lara and Eagle, but ended up not seeing action yesterday night. So that will probably be back next year. Lots more items that, were kind of on the table in terms of economic development, tax cuts, that really saw the end of the road for this particular legislative session last night.
So looking ahead to next year, before getting into kind of like the specific legislation, can we talk about the uniqueness of having a unified Democratic government in Michigan? Aside from the obvious shifts in political power, how does that alter the day-to-day function of governing? You think about like committee chairs, staff roles, special interests.
Well, if I can jump in really quick, the last time that, speaking of the uniqueness of a Democratic trifecta, the last time we had one in Michigan was 1982, and it lasted for 1 year because of a recall. There were two senators who were recalled, and they lost the Democratic majority in the Senate. Prior to that, the last time that a Democratic trifecta was elected was 1932. So we talk a lot about 40 years ago, but prior to that, there was another 50 years of drought, if you will, between Democratic trifectas. So we are in a very unique moment, I would say. As far as the day-to-day goes, yeah, you're exactly right. There's going to be a time period of the Democratic majorities learning to crawl before they walk, before they run. They're just going to have to get staff together that have not been in a majority and are going to be learning their role. I was serving on staff in the legislature at the time that Gretchen Whitmer was elected, and we noticed this too. And it was about a 6-month rollout of the staff really learning their jobs and how to function. And I expect that you'll see a similar time frame for the Democratic staff on both sides. Keep in mind too, it's a double majority, and 2 majorities who are going to have to hire policy staff that's larger than they've ever had, who are going to have extra staff available to them in the Senate because of higher spending limits for Senate majority versus Senate minority. The talent pool is going to face some interesting challenges over the next little bit while committees hire clerks. Those are also a partisan position. So there's going to be a lot of people moving around on the staff carousel. And I would think it'd be important for people to extend them some grace while they're getting up to speed over the next 4 to 6 months.
I guess as a follow-up to that, does that mean there's going to be a lot of people of the opposite partisan persuasion available for hire in the near future here?
I would think there may be some.
Yeah, just curious.
Yeah, Dan, I think everything Kate said was spot on. And in fact, there's a kind of a joke swirling around Lansing right now that even the Capitol Christmas tree is leaning a little bit to the left out there in front. And it's true, it is. But yeah, I mean, really, we have this kind of 2-voter, 1-member, if you will, majority. And what I mean by that in the House and the Senate, so it's 56-54 in the House, 20-18 in the Senate. What that means, and I see you have a question there in the chat about, every man, every woman, every elected member kind of a king in that really closely divided government, because you flip 1 vote and it means you're suddenly at a tie. Of course, on the Senate side, the LG, Lieutenant Governor, is able to break that tie. But already we have possible announcements from folks like Representative Kevin Coleman thinking about running for mayor. So those very slim majorities will make it important for, if you're looking at it from the Dem caucus perspective, to hold your members together. But really, it's going to also be, you can imagine there's an incentive for Republicans to moderate, to come across, work with Democrats, see what they can find agreement on, and really produce maybe a larger moderate class of kind of incoming Republicans in particular. So really lots of pieces up for question right now. The Democratic caucus retreats will be happening in the weeks to come. They're figuring out right now what the priorities look like. Already we're hearing things like there's a ton of pent up demand for Democratic priorities, from right to work legislation, of course, $6 billion on the table in terms of budget, affordable housing, clean energy and workforce development, LGBTQ rights, clean energy, that kind of stuff. But in figuring all that out, first, you got to get the basics right, as Kate's saying. What do the committees look like? Right now, we have the appropriations committee chairs. We have leadership established. but all the important standing committees of each chamber are not yet named. And it's not just who's on the committee, right? It's who's chairing and leading the committee. It's what is the committee's charge and title. So it's different if you have an energy committee versus if you have an energy and climate resiliency committee. You perceive of that committee differently. Maybe it's, you move from regulatory reform to good governance and democracy. Maybe elections becomes elections and democracy. So Democratic leadership now has the ability to shape not only the structure and charge of those committees, but the framing of them. And they can grow and expand them. So committees that don't exist today can be created. Already there's a talk of an affordable housing committee, maybe a clean water committee in Lansing. So really important decision-making that'll happen in the next several weeks. Anybody's guess on when that'll be done, but probably January, February timeframe.
Yeah, if I can just add to that a little bit, I think it would be interesting to people. Right now in the House, there's not a committee that mentions the word environment. I think it would be wonderful if the incoming House majority could add the word environment to one of its committees, because as Nick is indicating, it drives conversation and it drives the charge of the committee and how they are going to carry out their business and what their values are. And I think it's going to be an important thing to watch, and he's dead on. Look for those committee announcements post the first session, which is January 11th, sometime in late January.
So what issues are most likely to be affected by leadership changes? We talked about this a little bit already. What do you think are going to emerge as near-term priorities or opportunities? Anything you expect? And on the flip side, anything you expect to be de-emphasized in this new environment that may have important sustainable business practices and in the coming years, or may have been important to sustainable business practices in recent years?
It's a good question. In thinking about this ahead of time, I really think this is a net win for sustainable business practices. There's going to be more opportunity across the board in terms of tax credits, incentives. I think economic development, talent attraction, retention will remain a top priority and even increase. I think there'll be more votes there to pass. Let's just use the generic term interventions to support sustainable business development activities. Couldn't immediately pinpoint any individual area that would be pulled back or made more difficult in terms of sustainable business practices.
What type of issues do you think are going to be emerge as the near-term priorities or opportunities?
Yeah, that discussion is happening right now. Of course, interest groups, including my own, but all sorts of interest groups are putting their priorities forward. I think you'll see that some of the winning interest groups, right, would be labor, environment. I think local governments will have a stronger hand. There are, of course, lots of stakeholder groups out there that remain influential, regardless of who's in power.
2022,
so Alexa's weighing in.
For a 30-year fixed.
Alexa, stop. She's always listening.
Invited to the panel.
No. The utilities will remain influential. And it's really tough to say. I think a big part of this equation is what are the kitchen table issues that will emerge most important? I think given the governor's experience, the new Democratic majorities will be looking to her and really want to walk in lockstep with her out of the gate, at least early on. And so look for those kitchen table issues to emerge first. So I think they're going to want to get some wins on the board early with $6 billion of relatively unmarked general fund, school aid fund surplus dollars. Look for them to put up some big spending bills early on and make winners out of everyone. And then we'll get probably into the more difficult things as time moves on. And as Kate mentioned, the logistics of actually building the staffs and capacity to move legislation are resolved.
Karen, Kate, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So my prediction that the number one priority, given that it did not pass the Republican House last night, despite passing the Senate, is that the first thing that this legislature is going to do is move up the presidential primary date. That's something that we've been watching on a national level. And I believe there is a date that it has to be done by. That's in early January. So I wonder if they will call together quickly after January 1st and try to get that done. The governor is very interested in making sure that Michigan is one of those first 5 states who's voting in the presidential primary in the end of February. So that's my guess for what will be first. After that, I think Nick's right. You'll see some strategic low-hanging fruit that the Democratic caucuses will pursue, probably shoring up Elliott Larson so that there's not discrimination against people who identify as LGBTQ+. The 1931 laws that we talked about all during the election season regarding abortion, that law actually encompasses quite a number of odd things that are on the books right now that are illegal in Michigan. Cohabitation, blasphemy is a misdemeanor in Michigan right now. I think that you'll see some of those visited and taken down as those caucuses are looking to learn how to work together. So that's my guess for how they'll approach it, and then they'll tackle the bigger issues in later months once they've been able to grow a little bit.
Karen, anything like to add here?
Michigan Recycling Coalition in my work is really focused on sustainable materials management, circular economy development. My work in the legislature has really been limited to funding for our issues and policy change and a framework we can work on. So I'm learning a lot in this conversation, and I appreciate it.
Wonderful. So we've talked a little about I think, Nick, you just said the governor is likely to take a leadership role as we figure these things out. So notice that, not only is Governor Whitmer back for another term, but most of her peers in the Great Lakes region are now in their second term as well. I've heard that is also a unique scenario, having so many heads of states already familiar with each other and somewhat aligned on shared interests. Do you think that's going to have an impact on regional issues like Great Lakes protection, circularity? I
absolutely do. I think there are 3 main ways in which it will kind of right out of the gate. One, it's going to embolden the 3 together, in particular, Wisconsin. I'm looking over there. When one is able to pass, let's just say, scale clean energy legislation, that will politically embolden the others to do the same. But it's not just about the kind of symbolic posturing. It's also the actual on the ground experience with the legislation, the policy itself, the expertise sharing. I know there's a very close relationship between Governor Evers' office and Governor Whitmer's office, for example, on PFAS issues. They're constantly sharing the advanced tech to destroy and break down the chemical. Those types of things will be just more and more sharing, more and more learning, and how to work with similar stakeholder groups, both in support and opposition as legislation moves through the process. I also think there's going to be more opportunity for regional compacts. So, for example, around electric vehicles, heavy duty vehicles, to move an economic region forward together, a geographic region forward together, makes it a policy, even if it's just a policy without any teeth, some sort of memorandum of understanding between states. It makes it more powerful when you have more states aligned. So yeah, I do expect to see more of that, and I expect it to impact sustainability issues.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, the amount of funding that we're seeing coming out of the federal government to support all of this work is going to have a huge impact on the region. I'm even involved in a project with MSU and OSU partnering for sustainable packaging kinds of issues that will result in billions of dollars in research and development to do something different. So these are partnerships that I don't think we've really ever seen before, fueled by funding and this real need to solve big problems.
Yeah, Karen, I'm glad you brought up funding, because it's absolutely worth mentioning that another major area, perhaps one of the most potent areas for improvement in terms of the clean energy sector, will be how the IRA and IIJA, the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure and Jobs Act that have been passed really in the last year to 16 months now together, how that money will start to flow, that economic opportunity will start to flow. The states will be looking at each other and sometimes working directly with each other. If you look at grid transmission, for example, more than $10.5 billion available in transmission to site major clean energy projects to move large amounts of energy, sometimes between states. That requires regional cooperation. That requires just best practice know-how on how to funnel dollars. And all of that's being figured out right now, and certainly will be figured out in tandem.
So going back to part 115 for a minute, a number of environmental groups, such as the Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition, such as Sierra Club Ecology Center, did come out against part 115 earlier this week. And we don't think we need to get too deep into this kind of the specifics of that, but there has been a part of the environmental movement in the state that has been critical of the work that has come out of the administration, the legislature, on topics that are trying to advance a more sustainable state and communities over the past years. Any thoughts on how that dynamic might change with a unified Democratic? Do you expect those voices to have more influence, or do you expect these processes to maybe roll a little differently?
You take that one first, Nick, and maybe I'll have something to add after.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do expect the environmental justice movement and the representatives in Lansing to be emboldened and empowered. I know that, for a fact that several of the groups are hiring. They're looking to bring on Lansing representation so they can be more present on the ground. They're building an environmental justice caucus in the House and the Senate. And I know that one of their representatives is Abraham Ayash on the House side in particular, who's now the floor leader. So essentially the number 2 Democrat, if you will, and a progressive. And so he'll be able to be a voice for those issues directly in the floor, in the caucus room. There are other members, of course, on the Senate side as well. So I think that their power has grown with the election results, and their issues will receive more attention across the board. I think it'll be anything from administration policy, so implementing the My Healthy Climate Plan, to votes like the one that we saw last night, where there are environmental justice issues that bubble to the surface. Absolutely.
Anything comment on the specific legislation? And I think Karen, you're about to.
Yeah, before I do that, I want to say that, I think it's really important that, these voices are at the table, and that, they are empowered, that we are all empowered to deal with these really important issues. And it's going to be really important that we're building coalitions around and understanding around topics that are very, very complicated. And, I think the challenge that we faced last night is that we just didn't have time to do that. We didn't have time to build that understanding. Getting into a little bit into the details is that, we changed this amendment, this chemical recycling amendment, changed the definition of chemical recycling, but ultimately it does not change how the regulatory framework sees these kinds of facilities. It just adds clarity to what they are and what they aren't. They're not considered solid waste facilities. They're considered manufacturing facilities, and they are to be regulated under, air quality permitting and groundwater permitting, and not solid waste permitting, because solid waste is really kind of special, and we need to create clear boundaries around solid waste issues. So it's really going to be important that, we have the time, and we take the time to understand all the issues and come to some understanding about how we can move forward together to protect everybody.
So building just a little bit on what Karen and Nick had to say, but from a more pulled back point of view, I think that in terms of generating conversational currency in Lansing and moving talks forward, that environmental organizations are going to have an opportunity to play a huge role. There are 28 new freshmen in the Democratic majority. They are currently drinking through a fire hose. They are learning everything that they possibly can about the topics that they're going to be dealing with. So the opportunity is absolutely huge right now, is the time that they are really getting their feet under them and learning all of these things. And so taking the time, like Karen was saying, to do education and help them gain understanding in a way that moves these topics forward is going to be key.
Yeah. Dan, one more idea I would offer is that, no movement is a monolith. And of course, the environmental justice movement is similar. There's a lot of diversity of groups, of the approaches, of scale. Some folks are grassroots. They really operate on sometimes a block level, sometimes it's a neighborhood level, a city level. And the more that we have groups wanting to play at the state and national level, and I think you will see that because of the Dem majority, there will be a more direct access to power and decision-making, and that direct access will compel more nuance into the conversation. So I think a really important role environmental justice groups have played recently out of power is to make groups that are constantly in the legislature, like a Michigan LCV, like a Sierra Club, better, right? Like they'll openly say that we want to make the movement, the conservation movement better, to do better by environmental justice issues. And that will continue to happen. But I think you'll also see the direct access to power in a way that those groups that are playing in Lansing, that are working at that scale, will have to confront some of the very, very difficult decisions, because that's the sausage making that is public policy is a very difficult thing, and you have to make trade-offs. The perfect normative legislation doesn't exist, because the normative for who and whom across the state. And so to make those compromises in the moment when you can either move legislation or not, I think will compel a more sophisticated and more nuanced conversation, but only time will tell. I do think
and
incentive out there.
Nick, you're exactly right. And I think that the established, environmental organizations at the state level, Sierra Club, MEC, you play an important role in bringing people to the table and creating the bridge for these new folks growing in their power to better understand and better be able to navigate the complexities that it is. So it behooves you all to get good at bringing people together and talking about these issues on a regular basis.
So over the past month, the media has been, a buzz about how a red wave failed to emerge at the federal and to a large extent, obviously Michigan, the state level, but at the local level, and I don't think it's not just limited to the Republican Party. There was a lot of turnover. So I live in Grand Rapids, all of our city commissioners turned over for the most part. And broadly across the state, most of it did seem to be in favor of aggressively conservative politicians and positions, especially at school boards, especially at county commissions. In West Michigan, we have a great example in Ottawa County, where a group called Ottawa Impact made opposition to diversity, equity, inclusion a major campaign issue for themselves, and successfully ran enough candidates to take a majority of the county commission. And those programs will likely be eliminated fairly early next year as a result of that turnover. So I don't want to make assumptions, but it seems like that would have that this movement in counties, school boards, local governments would have to have an impact on public or private sector efforts to advance sustainability in our state. You don't have to have an effort to advance diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. How do you think that's going to shake out in the next few years here?
Kate, you want the first stab at that?
Well, yeah, I just hesitate to answer from a sustainability specific standpoint, because I don't feel quite familiar enough with how local ordinances and things like that might operate. Certainly
maybe from just a justice standpoint then?
Well, I don't think your fears are unfounded. I guess my comment would be that in 2018, the people of Michigan spoke extremely clearly that they wanted to end gerrymandering at the state level. And we did that, and we took care of it. But because that was a constitutional amendment, county commissions are actually redistricted. The law that governs that is in state statute versus the state constitution. So it was unaffected by the 2018 proposal that ended gerrymandering. It hasn't changed. And so whatever party is in control of a county has the ability to redraw commissions. So that's in Michigan. Let me see how good I can remember here. It is the county prosecutor, county clerk, county treasurer, and then the two the Republican and Democratic Party, the two major parties, sit down in a room and they redraw county commissions. So for example, in Kent County, that's 4 Republicans and 1 Democrat. And so you have a particular map that's drawn to favor Republicans. I think an effort to end that type of potential for gerrymandering at the local level, you might see that come up in the next 2 years with Democratic majorities and see an improvement in that policy. So I guess that's what I'll speak to it. If you would like to have better policies that are more sustainability minded on the local level, that might be an effort that needs to be undertaken.
Yeah, and Dan, I can't speak to what happened kind of statewide. I do know that in the last several years, Oakland County, for example, has gotten much more Democratic, and there is a very, I'd say, climate resiliency forward agenda emerging from that very important county. I got to tell you, I was as somebody that was walking Rosie Mound natural area, and between Hoffmaster and Coast Guard Park, the first fear that entered my mind was the natural Ottawa County Parks Great Natural Park System in the millage that has funded that world-class park system. But I can't really speak to how these folks that were newly elected would actually, on an agenda basis, go in and impact policy on the ground. But something certainly to watch, and we will be watching that closely. I think we will be looking for counties, and this is the we being Michigan LCV at the moment, that are looking to lead and really be kind of, we have the laboratories of democracy states on the federal level, but also counties are, operating a similar function at the state level. So what are those counties that want to lead for protections around septics and improved sanitation? Where do they want to lead on infrastructure? Where do they want to lead on rollout of, in particular, clean energy, storage, transmission, all that kind of thing? And can we use that to funnel it up to the state level to demonstrate that those policies work, those programs work? So that's kind of how I'll be thinking about local governments, particularly at the county level.
Karen, what are your thoughts? I think it's like Part 115, that will be locally executed.
Yes, it will be executed at the county level, and the counties will have to engage all the municipalities in that conversation. And I think it's the appropriate level to have those conversations. It gives, people say, but it also brings it in the kind of collective environment. But, I have to say, I was able to listen to Mike Shirkey's, Senate Majority Leader's speech on the House or the Senate floor last night. And it was very striking about the fears of, I don't even know how to say it. It was a little bit, I was taken aback by his concern for a one world order kind of situation. And I can't help but be a little bit scared of the extremes in both parties continuing to kind of disrupt forward movement to solve the big problems of the day on both sides. And that's why, I talked about the real need to bring people to the table and to educate. And, if I could bring it to the microcosm that is recycling, a national organization that's all about recycling identified that if we are to, level up recycling in the next, 5 years in the country, it would take about $17 billion to do that. $6 billion of that $17 billion is identified for education alone. And I think that says a lot to me. We've not invested in education and recycling here. That's part of our recycling problem in Michigan. But I think you can extrapolate it to some of the problems that we're seeing in a lot of issues here that, we're not taking the time to really learn and talk to one another and kumbaya. And that is going to be, I think, an important thing we need to do in this next term, but it's going to be hard because the real drive is going to be to move quickly because we've only got 2 years. We've only seen the 2 years that are right ahead of us.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Like, we're gonna move into some audience questions now. I think I've already learned quite a bit today. If you have questions and if you're in the audience, please do share those in the chat or via the Q&A function that you'll find on your screen here. We do have a few questions already. So what do we make of Liesl Clark's departure from Eagle? How do you think Eagle and other departments may approach the next next 4 years differently than before? Assuming
Well,
that the next director lasts 4 years, I guess.
yeah, I'm hearing that it wasn't voluntary and that, many of those positions that have changed maybe weren't voluntary in nature. So, I'm wondering, what the governor is interested in making happen that those leaders couldn't make happen. I've heard that there's some talk about putting Eagle and DNR back together. I don't think that's a great idea. They have very different missions. But I'm looking forward to new leadership in Eagle that can, I think, reinforce, what we're trying to do. And maybe not rely on bureaucracy so much, maybe get more creative about trying to implement the important things we want to implement.
Kate, Nick, any thoughts on new leadership at Eagle?
Well, one of the goals I think that's in place from the governor's perspective is customer service delivery through Eagle. I believe there were quite long periods of delays for folks who needed permits and things like that. And it's been a high level of frustration. I've noticed working with legislators frequently as part of the work we're doing, they are asking if we can also unstick something at Eagle that's held up. So my impression is that one of the goals is better customer service delivery overall.
Dan, this is a perspective that is independent of leadership. Regardless of any leadership change or not, we would, the conservation community would be looking to Eagle in a second gubernatorial term and this might not be the most popular answer in this webinar in this room, but more enforcement, honestly, of those laws that are on the books already. And, we have a situation where the green ooze incident right before the pandemic hit, where you have in some cases, not only repeated notice of violations going out, but years between the department notifying a bad actor of what they've done poorly, and just a whole lot of time that evolves before the problem is actually addressed to a point where the problem can escalate. So, that's where I would start. Like, where do we have opportunities to actually lean in with the bad actors, make an example of them in order to draw a contrast with the good actors, the many awesome businesses that are just doing great work and protecting the environment, and to give some more force to those laws that we have on the books. In particular, because of the Dem majorities, I do think there will be less meddling in the day-to-day bureaucracy of Eagle from an unhelpful legislative perspective. And what I mean by that is, I know staff in Eagle that get calls all the time from legislative offices when there's a particular issue going wrong in their district to their constituents. Well, the lawmaker doesn't really know much about that particular issue. They've heard the perspective of their constituent, and they're going to take that perspective. They're not taking the regulatory perspective. They're not taking the environmental protection perspective. So that swampland that was bulldozed over, may have been an annoyance to that owner, for example, that property owner, but maybe it was a critical retention basin for the area drainage district. That's just one kind of generic example of the type of intervention that Eagle would receive from lawmakers. So I expect we'll get less of that, and the folks doing the intervening will have less influence in the legislature. So maybe Eagle will find the ability to stand up a little bit where those laws do exist, and enforce them more consistently and stringently over time. I don't know. We'll see.
If I can add, Dan, I agree, Nick, more enforcement is necessary. I also see Eagle kind of at a crossroads. If we want to move into a society and a culture that actually prevents, environmental problems, then it needs to start acting differently. Yes, we have laws that we need to enforce. We also need to develop new policies and procedures and programs that prevent waste in the first place, hazardous problems in the first place, polluter pay, whatever it is. That's maybe what's the other side of that? How do we help people be good actors?
Curious about something, because Kate brought up customer service, and I don't know if I necessarily use that term, But I think everyone probably has an Eagle story about whether or not it's the stormwater permit or the grant payments, and sort of one of these like waiting for the Lions to win a Super Bowl type of thing. So it's like maybe that permit will finally come in. Are these fixable issues with new leadership, or any of the changes, or any potential changes that may arise from a unified government? Because the staff are still the same staff broadly. Not that it's a staff part, but just like,
I'll take a first kind of generic stab at that. I think some of them are. In part, you mentioned staff. That's a challenge across the state for organizations like Eagle, but a lot of your member businesses, everyone's having a difficult time hiring and finding good quality people, getting them trained to do the critical work. And Eagle's in the same position. And so I don't know when those labor issues start to resolve themselves. I think for the first time in my career, the money's there, but now the people aren't there. But I think that in particular, one thing that I would absolutely applaud Lisa Clark, her time in Eagle, she had the back of her employees all the time and was constantly trying to lift morale there. And I thought that was a really great approach. We all know how important the human resource is in this equation. So I think that'll continue to be a challenge in the near term as labor markets kind of resolve themselves. But I would start there. And I think another piece of, you were talking about getting that permit. Some of it's just difficult, right? One person's permit that they're waiting on, if you look on the environmental protection side, maybe that permit shouldn't be granted. And how do you get to a point where you give a definitive answer? Because Eagle doesn't want to give out the definitive no, and the customer asking for the permit doesn't want to receive a definitive no. So, that's where the amendment process comes in around those permits that can take months and years sometimes. And maybe it ends up in a positive resolution for both the environment and the business, but that interim is just hard for both parties.
Any final thoughts or questions today? I do have one comment from Wendy from someone noting that's on Karen's thought about the potential for MD&R to Eagle to merge again. The new MD&R director, or the interim Eagle director, is the MD&R director. So that does kind of lend to that thoughts. Before we break, though, would someone mind sharing some of the history for those who haven't been around for the past 10 years of the MD&R and Eagle kind of being a unified entity versus a separate entity?
Gosh, I don't know if I have the history at the top of my head, but it's gone back and forth for what feels like years. And I'm frankly a little bit tired of going through that gyration to really no significant, benefit. I don't think. I like, let's work with the structure we have. Let's focus on actually bringing solutions to the problems that we have. Rather, I don't know how much changing that structure really changes the challenges we have.
Yeah, I would have to hear a top quality argument for it as well to support it. But certainly would have an open mind to hear that. I think one additional challenge, but also opportunity, is in this post-COVID landscape where the physical space just isn't quite as important and offers new opportunities and challenges in thinking of a reorg. Because you imagine the olden days, back in I think it happened both in Granholm and Snyder administrations, there were various reorgs, bringing them together and pulling them apart again. And going back to Engler even, but there was a major physical task of actually moving office space and shared physical resource together and then pulling it apart right down to computers and file systems and offices. And that challenge looks different now. And gosh, I don't know what it would look like or what the modern post-COVID virtual model would be. Maybe it's a lot lighter of an integration that we haven't just given a lot of thought to yet. but something certainly to consider. And again, I'm kind of with Karen. I would have to hear a really good argument for it, but maybe that argument exists.
Yeah, when this conjecture was happening last night in lame duck, it was put forward that maybe if we're going to combine departments, let's combine regulatory departments, Eagle and MDARD, for instance, because they have a similar mission as in regulatory in nature. What we don't really have is a focus on preventing all of these issues in the first place. That's a second thought in these regulatory agencies, and it's something the agencies are going to have to get better at, I think.
Yeah, and I will add, regardless of leadership or agency makeup, speaking for our organization, we are deeply grateful for all the work that's all the wonderful and overworked people at Eagle do every day.
Yes.
And I'm also deeply grateful to Kate, Nick, and Karen for taking the time to talk with us today. A lot of great discussion, really well timed. I'm glad that we did that the Part 115 vote happened yesterday, so that's you'd be available for us this morning, I suppose. Congratulations to Karen and and to Kate as well on your recent wins. And thank you again, and thank you everyone for joining us today. There will be a video of this available if you'd like to check it out again, or to review any points made today. And we will be forwarding the contact information for Karen, Nick, and Kate if you would like to learn more about their organizations.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Dan.
so
Really
much.
appreciate this.
Thank you.
Thank you to the forum.
Yeah, take care, everybody.